The virtual campground is a community of RVers. We gather around the campfire to share stories, information, and travel tips to help you on your next adventure.
My name is Randy Moats.
And I'm Georgia Harris.
And we are full-time RVers, started in July of 2019. Everything we own is in our Newmar Dutch Star that we've been traveling around the country since we first started. We stop in Texas. That's our home base. And we spend 2 to 3 months in Texas, like a lot of people do, taking care of doctor stuff and dentists and all of that stuff. But typically 9 to 10 months out of the year, we are traveling.
You've gotten to travel around the world, and I would love one day to sit around and talk with you about those. But today we're going to talk about the Appalachian Trail, because the two of you decided to hike it, the whole trail. Is that right?
Right.
It goes from Maine all the way to Georgia? Am I right?
Or Georgia to Maine.
Yeah.
Oh, which way did you do it?
We did Georgia to Maine.
And it is a continuous, like over 2,000 miles, correct?
Right now, it's at 2,190 miles.
Okay.
When we did it, it was 2,175 miles.
How did it grow?
There are certain areas, especially around urban areas, that get a lot of use by day hikers and weekend hikers, and the trail just gets worn out. So they have to reroute the trail in a different area so that the area can sort of regenerate itself. So when they do those reroutes, a lot of times that will add extra miles to the length of the trail. And what I read recently is was one section of the trail where they actually went out and remeasured it. And now that they have better measuring devices to do it rather than just a wheel, they found out that their section was actually longer than they had advertised it was for years. So now it's 15 miles longer than it was when we did it 17 years ago.
17 years ago. Yeah, well, just an example from yesterday when we were out, we hiked on the trail yesterday here in Virginia, and I usually have 2 to 3 or 4 apps running to monitor the GPS. And yesterday there were signs on the trail that said it was 3 miles. And when we got to our turnaround point, it was actually 3.3. And so that's 3/10 right there that the GPS measured as longer than what the signs are along the trail, which is what the guidebooks say. So there's a lot of sections there that are measured more accurately with the GPS now.
How long had y'all been together at this point? And then what made you decide to do this together?
I'll let Georgia tell this part of the story.
So we got married in 92. So we've been together now 31 years. And we always were trying to find something to do active, get exercise or whatever. So where we were living in Maryland, there was a little trail around the lake. It was 1.25 miles. You do it a couple times, you get 2.5 miles, and it gets super boring. And so I came home one day and said, hey, how about if we hike the Appalachian Trail? And he gave me this look like,
okay.
And so we started hiking, and the first couple times out were pretty rough. And we learned a lot about gear, a lot about communication and being honest with each other if we weren't feeling good or if we were starting to get blisters on our feet or something.
Proper clothing.
Yeah.
How to take care of your feet.
Yeah. So we learned a lot. So we started hiking in 2000. And so by 2006, we had whittled that down pretty good in terms of our gear and communications. And so we started out with, my pack was something like 6.5 pounds, my first backpack. Empty, yeah. And so I got a new one before we did that, and it brought it down to 2 pounds. And the first tent we had, we said, oh, let's get a big enough tent so that we've got plenty of room inside. And it was something like 5.5 or 6 pounds, but it was a 3-person tent. We could fit everything inside. And then I'm carrying the tent and he's carrying the poles. So I said, check out this new tent I found. It's about 1 pound lighter. So by the time we did our hike on the Appalachian Trail, our tent carrying weight was right around 2 pounds also. So we, cut our gear back significantly from when we first started, and we were in much better shape by then also.
So how long did it take you to do the whole trail? And how often did you get off the trail?
So we were on the trail for 6 months, from March 25th to September 25th. We had something like 186 days out there, where about 160 some were actually hiking, and the rest of them are what we would call 0 days, where a 0 day is where you don't do any miles, and typically it's not really a day off or a day of rest, although you would like it to be. But you end up in town taking a shower, getting resupplied, doing your laundry, looking at the Weather Channel to see how many days of rain you have coming up. Our average number of miles per day was just over 12, right around 13 if we look at just hiking days. But what people don't think about is once you hit New England, you're done with about 80% of the miles, but you still have about 80% of the work to do. And so you're not really walking up and down mountains at that point. Sometimes you're grabbing hold of tree roots and trees and climbing up rocks or sliding down rocks on your butt. And so there's a lot of bouldering and hard work once you hit New England. That is harder to get those miles in than just if we were walking around town, for example.
So maybe you should start in Maine, is what I'm hearing.
Well, you're not in shape once you if you start in Maine. Yeah.
That's true. Very good. Very, very good point. How long did it take you to prepare? Was the preparation more that 2000 to 2006 of getting ready, or were there specific times you were preparing for the Appalachian Trail?
We're both type A personalities, so we had a plan, and our plan was to start doing short hikes, build up, make the hikes longer, do an overnight, stay out for 2 or 3 days, try different types of food. So everything sort of built on what we had done prior to work ourselves up to where we felt confident that enough about what we could do in a day's time, how to set up our tent quick every day when we got into camp. We each did the same thing every day, so we were efficient at doing that. That's stuff that we developed over the course of those 6 years of what we call training. There was definitely a method to the madness, so to speak.
Yeah, but at the same time, once we started hiking and we got on the trail in Georgia, and after a day or two, we looked at each other and we're like, we trained for this, right? So the mountains are the mountains, right?
Just to show you how much type A we are, we had a spreadsheet from day one till the end of the hike that we did in advance, where we researched the trail, the mileage between shelters and campsites and all that, planned everything out, how many miles we were going to do every day so we could finish at a certain time. We needed to be this place, this day, and that lasted 3 days.
I was going to ask you, did you stick to it? So no.
Yeah, the first 3 days in Georgia, climbing up the mountains in Georgia and down the other side, we were already off schedule and go, yeah, we're done with the spreadsheet.
Well, we did use the spreadsheet after that. So my mom and dad drove their motorhome from Georgia to Maine also, and they met up with us at road crossings. And so we didn't stay in the motorhome, but they would have our supplies. So in their car, they would have our supplies in their trunk, so we could resupply from them. They would take us into town on the 0 days that we had. And
so we didn't have to hitchhike.
So my dad always still up until he passed away was joking with us. Oh, you got a spreadsheet for that? And so we did use the spreadsheet later on, where we would decide how many miles we could do, met up with them again. And so we were, let's say, at this road crossing in Harper's Ferry, and we said, we'll meet you at the end of Maryland in 40 miles. that'll be about 3 days, and we'll meet you at Penmar at the border of Pennsylvania. And so we were able to look at the spreadsheet to say, okay, here's what's going on in this section, and we'll meet up with you here.
We found during the 6 years of preparation that we weren't big fans of the prepackaged dehydrated meals that you could buy at places like REI or Dick's. These are the ones you just boil up hot water, pour it into the bag, let it steep in there for a while, and then eat it. And we found most of that stuff wasn't really edible. A lot of times the package probably tasted better than the meal. So we spent a lot of time dehydrating our own food and vacuum sealing it and put it in boxes to mail to ourselves along the trail so we could resupply with our own food that we had packaged that we knew we liked because we had experimented with it before we ever got on the trail. And that worked really well for us.
Awesome. Well, I do know that based on your trail experience, you wrote a couple of books. So do you have the recipes in one of those books for the dehydrated foods?
No, there's a couple of really good books out there already, and I would modify them for us, but there's already a couple of good books out there about that.
You did write 2 books, one about your adventure as a married couple and how that affected your marriage. And then the other one, I think, had to do with the faith part of your trip as well. So how did you decide to write those 2 books?
The first one, the number one question that we got when we were hiking is people would find out that we were married and they would say, "Oh, and you're still together."
How do you do that?
Yeah, how do you do that? Well, I carry the tent, he carries the poles. I carry the dinner, he carries the stove. If we want to eat and have a place to sleep tonight, we better be getting along.
Yeah, so we decided to
write a book,
put everything in the book so people can read it.
Perfect. So the second one, actually, the first talk we gave when we got done with our hike was at our primary church, and the people from our hiking group, they asked some really interesting spiritual questions. And one of the questions was, how did you pray? And what was your prayer life like on the trail? And I said, well, sometimes you're praying that you make it to camp. And when we were hiking after that, the outline sort of just came to us about what was interesting, what was important along that. So when you're hiking the Appalachian Trail, you're following these white blazes that are 2 inches by 6 inches. And so that's how the path that we're following is guiding us. And so sometimes you'll be going along and you think you're on the path, but there's no more blazes. So there was one place in Pennsylvania that we were hiking, and there were yellow splotches on the trees that ended up being boundary markers. It looked like the path, but it wasn't. And so we did a comparison of, okay, if you have a walk of faith and you're following what the book tells you and you're following the path, you think you're following the path and really you're not following what it says. And so that was the chapter on the path. Another one was on people and our trail family, if you will, and how important it is to have relationships with other people out there.
There was chapters on perseverance, chapters on humility. You get humbled real quick when you're out on the trail, and everybody, after about a month, you're all on equal footing. There's nobody who's more important than anybody else because you just trying to get through the day and help each other. So I think there's 10 chapters in the book, and each one is on a different spiritual discipline. And Georgia wrote some prayers in there, devotionals, and I put in some Native American wisdom.
Well, I have really enjoyed talking with you guys. I appreciate it so much for you to come on, and I will make sure everybody knows how to follow you guys on all of your adventures in the States and not in the States, whether you're in a tent or in an RV and playing music or not. So thank you so much again for coming out to the virtual campground.
Thanks, Deborah. This was so much fun. Thanks for having us on.
Thank you.